Hello and welcome to Veg Around the World with me, Meenakshi Garodia, where I believe in simple recipes, authentic taste. In this show, we explore one country at a time through its vegetarian food. This show, we're going to explore the USA, United States of America, but that's not exactly accurate because America is so big and it has so many different types of foods and cuisines in different parts of the USA. It's a huge country that I'm just going to focus on southern food. Now, southern food is, the southern states are what's below the Mason-Dixon line, and all the different states have slightly different types of cuisines. I've chosen some dishes and each one will taste different. A lot of places, when you have a lot of slight differences, there will be, like the gumbo will be made differently in Tennessee, it will be made differently in Louisiana. I've just chosen the dishes I like and I've made them the way I like to eat them. Southern food has a cult following to it, and you can see that because I think it's probably the only cuisine that has a living museum of living history of southern food in New Orleans, where they actually tell you all about the food, and partly that's because it's a mix of so many different cultures. Southern food obviously started off with the Native Americans who were already in the area, then the European settlers who came in, and then because of the economy and the culture, there were a lot of slaves who were brought in from Africa, and a lot of them were brought in through the Caribbean. So there's a lot of African and Caribbean influence on the food. It comes together in this melting pot and it's absolutely delicious. The dishes I'm going to make today, I'm going to make grits. Grits is essentially cornmeal. Some people call it polenta, some people call it grits, but I'm going to add, which is Native American, but I'm going to add some cheese and some cream and butter to make it tastier. And that's going to make it more European. That's a European influence. I'm going to follow that up with biscuits and gravy. Now, gravy is almost never vegetarian, and probably this gravy won't be as tasty as gravy with some pork or chicken in it, but it's pretty tasty. And this is very plantation food. I'm going to follow that up with gumbo. Gumbo is like a meal. It's a complete meal by itself. It's a stew. I'm going to make an okra gumbo. Now, the okra is the influence from Africa, and gumbo is normally had with rice, but you can also have it as soup. So I'm not serving rice today, but you can if you want to. And I'm going to follow that up with peach cobbler, which is very European again, because a cobbler is essentially a different way of making a pie. And I'm going to show you the method of making it. It is so easy, you can make it in like 10 minutes. So let's get started. As always, I'm going to start with the dishes that take the longest. I have my oven preheated at 450. And I'm going to start with the peach cobbler, follow that with the biscuits, follow that with the gumbo. I mean, I'm going to do the other things sort of together. Now, for making a peach cobbler, you obviously need peaches, right? If you have ripe peaches available, you can buy it, peel it, chop it, pit it. Because I'm lucky to live in a place where I can easily find sliced peaches and very good organic quality, I'm just going to use this. And you take around 2 cups, which is slightly more than half. And I'm going to take it directly. I'm going to be cooking it in this. Normally, I like to cook it in these nice country looking dishes, but I wanted you to be able to see what's going on inside. So I'm doing it in a transparent glass dish. So this is around 2 cups. I'm just going to take 2 cups. Now, in this, we're going to add a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of regular sugar, a little cornstarch. Now, cornstarch is really important in pies and in crumbles and cobblers, because essentially what it does is it soaks up the excessive liquid. I'm going to put 1 teaspoon. You can put slightly more if you want to, but this is good. We're going to spice it up. We're going to put a dash of lemon. Some cinnamon, maybe like 1/4 of a spoon. Some nutmeg. Now, nutmeg is a spice I find to be extremely flavorful, but you have to be careful not to put too much. And my secret ingredient for a cobbler, which most people do not put in, but I just find it adds a little kick, is cayenne pepper. So I'm not going to put much, just 1/8, the same amount as the nutmeg. You can put in as much or as little butter as you want, but it is tastier with butter. When I want to make something healthier, I put in less butter, but right now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put a little bit of butter in the fruit itself. What that does is it just adds this creaminess to the food. The rest of this butter we're going to put inside this dish and melt it in the microwave. I use a lot of the microwave in my cooking. With butter you need to be careful, so I'm just going to do 45 seconds. Meanwhile, I'm going to give this a nice stir. Now you can bake this if you wanted, but it's so much faster again in the microwave. I think the butter's done. That's perfect, and this just goes in for 6 minutes. Now once we have this butter, we're going to add 1 cup of flour to it. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And I like to add a little salt. I like this whole combination of sweet and salty together. It always works for me. So I'm not going to put too much, just like half a teaspoon. But it just adds, you know, when you just have one flavor, it's not as rich in your mouth, but when you have a couple of flavors blended in together, it somehow makes the first flavor pop too. And I definitely find that with sugar and salt. Like any cake I make, any sweet dish I make, there's always some salt in it, and chili sometimes. So this does need a good amount of sugar, so slightly less than 1/4 cup, again of both. And that's it, we stir it up. You can even use your hands to work this, and like for making biscuits you definitely need to use your hands, but I'm good with this right now. I like this consistency, but if your dish, if you don't sometimes when you're just mixing it, it doesn't get the right consistency, you add a little water. I like it like this because what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of crumble it over the peach, and I like my bits to get crispy and brown at the same time. Okay, I'm going to use my hands. You know I have a propensity to use my hands for my food, and I just washed it. To give it a nice stir and to get a feel whether it's the right consistency, using your hands always helps. Okay, this looks good. The peaches sound about done, and they are. And this is not too hot to hold. I love Pyrex, the brand Pyrex. Their glassware is just amazing. So as you can see, the peaches are nicely done, and we are going to be cooking it for another 20-25 minutes. So it doesn't really matter that it's not fully done because they will cook a bit more. And I do like the bits to be a bit crunchy. So what we're going to do for this is we're just going to take this and sort of sprinkle it on. We're going to cover the whole thing, but I like to sprinkle it on because, you know, the more surface area you have, the more crunchy it gets, because more of it can get cooked easily. And I want to try to cover all of it because I don't know about you, but for me the crust, the crumble, it's almost like tastier than the fruit. Actually, you need an equal amount of both. And I'm just going to put this inside the oven, which is set at 450. What we're going to make next are the biscuits. Now biscuits sound really fancy, but probably they're the easiest kind of bread to make because A, you don't let it leaven, B, you actually not supposed to knead it either, so no elbow grease required. The trick with biscuits to make them light and fluffy is your fat needs to be cold and you don't work your flour. Now flour has something called gluten, and the more you work it and the more you let it sit, it elongates to give it a slightly chewy, stretchy texture. Biscuits don't have that, we don't want that. So for the biscuits, what we're going to start with is actually, I'm going to do this first. You can use your hands, or I just use a good knife, and you chop up 4 tablespoons butter. Now you need to be precise. I love how it's marked here, so I just do 1, 2, 3, 4, exactly half. And if you have a good knife, it cuts through the paper. Not sure it's good for the knife, but it's good for me. So, and the knife is supposed to do what I want it to do. So we're just going to chop it up, the butter, fine. This is almost like insulting this knife, because it's just such a good knife and we're using it to cut butter. But hey, if you don't use a knife for everything that you need to do, what's the point of a good knife? The more you cut it up now, the easier it will be, or the less work it will be to work it into the flour. Okay, I think that's good. And there's no two ways about it. You pretty much need to use your hands in this. We're going to take 2 cups of flour, and the proportion for biscuits is pretty standard. You can substitute some of the things, like you can use different kind of liquids, but you can't substitute the proportion for just the right type. So 2 cups of flour, 4 teaspoons baking soda, that's what's going to get the leavening in. Half teaspoon baking powder, 4 teaspoons baking powder, half teaspoon baking soda. Give it a little stir. And the butter has to be really cold. It's just coming out from the fridge where I kept it with ice. And you put in the butter. And then you have fun with it. You take it and you just work it in. Work it in till you don't have any distinct pieces of fat left, and you don't need to knead it. I know it's a bad pun. It's got fat put in. I'm making buttermilk pancakes, buttermilk biscuits. Buttermilk and pancakes somehow go together. It's almost like a Pavlovian response to say buttermilk pancake. So we're going to take 1 cup of chilled buttermilk. And a spatula. Make a little hole in the middle and pour it in. I didn't add my salt and sugar. Normally you don't add much salt or much sugar, but I like my food a bit salty, so I like to add a little salt. I like my bread a bit salty. So I'm going to put around 1.5, 3/4 of a spoon of salt, and sugar again is not required, but I like the little twist of flavor it gives. So I'm just going to put like 1/2 spoon of sugar, and then you gently you don't want to knead it, because when you knead it, that releases the gluten. It makes the gluten do its stuff. You don't put too much butter. There's not that much fat. You'd think there would be more fat in this, but you don't put too much fat, because that will change the texture. The biscuit will no longer be soft and flaky. So I like using these silicone mats for other stuff. We flour it, so just put a little bit of flour in it. What did I do with my spatula? The food, the southern food has a lot of carbs in it, but that makes sense, because if you think about it, a lot of this food was sort of derived from the food which the slaves ate, and they did a lot of hard manual labor, so they needed a lot of energy. So we're going to flour this very nicely, and take our mixture. I'm going to flour my hands too. And we're just going to pat it down. Again, as I said, this doesn't need any kneading. But we want it to be flaky and we want layers. So what we're going to do is we're going to just fold it and then press down. And fold it. I've done this twice. I'm going to do it 6 times. Now we flatten this out to around an inch. This is a biscuit cutter, so it has to be that height. So that makes it easier to do. Now we're going to flour the baking pan. I'm just using this, but you can pretty much use anything. It doesn't have to have sides on it. And I'm going to flour the edge of this cutter because it's going to get sticky otherwise. I know this is messy, but the biscuits are so worth it. So you get it here, you press down, turn it around, get it here, press down, turn it around. Now we're just going to place these in the pan. As you can see, this was really easy. It hardly took any time. You want it close, but not too close because this is going to rise. You want to give it some time to rise. Rise and shine. Good morning. I'm going to put this into the oven. This you need to bake at 450 for maybe 15 minutes. So you need to keep an eye on it because different ovens work differently. It should be light brown. You don't want to overcook it and you don't want to undercook it. If you undercook it, it will be soggy from inside. If you overcook it, it will be too crisp. Now that we're done with the baking, we're going to proceed with the rest of the food, which is gumbo, grits and gravy. And that's alliteration, but it's very tasty. I like to do a lot of things simultaneously, so I'm not spending too much time in the kitchen. So I'm going to make the gumbo, the grits and the gravy. For the grits and the gravy, we need to start with butter. I'm going to tell you about the gumbo first. What we're going to put in the gumbo is we're going to put onions. So you have something called the trinity of southern cooking, which is onions, celery and peppers. And if you want to make it a holy trinity, you add some garlic to it. In our gumbo, and people are of a mixed opinion whether you should put tomato or not. So I put a little bit of tomato so it gives the flavor, but it's not overpowering. Our gumbo is going to have onions, obviously, and because gumbo normally has sausages in it or some meat in it, and I don't want to put that, I'm going to put some beans. These are pinto beans. In the south, you normally have pinto, black beans are very popular, and okra. Okra is very interesting. It's a vegetable which either you love or you hate. In India, we grew up on okra, so I love it. But you have to be careful because okra can very easily be slimy. And the trick to cooking okra is you wash it and you dry it. And it has to be fully dry before you cut it. And once you do that, then typically it doesn't end up being slimy. So I'm going to use butter for my cooking because I just have it here. But for the gumbo, you don't necessarily need butter. This is around 1 tablespoon. I'm going to put it on. And I'm going to put around slightly less than 1 tablespoon for the gravy. And we'll put that on too. when you're making grits, grits is essentially cooked. It's almost like a porridge made with cornmeal. A good way of doing it is you take one, actually don't, I'm going to make around half a cup of grits, and you don't need too much liquid in it, but I like to put extra liquid because it cooks the cornmeal more and it just tastier to me. I like the texture it gets. So this is 1 cup of broth, and you can make this just with water, but I like the flavor, the extra flavor broth brings. Very often grits are made in chicken broth. I've just used vegetable broth, and we're going to bring that to a boil. Now, normally gravy has a combination of some sort of broth with some sort of dairy and some sort of meat, like sausage broth or something. Normally gravy with sausage is supposed to be good. I wouldn't know, I'm vegetarian, but what I'm doing is I'm making the gravy with some of my favorite things, which would be caramelized onions and shiitake mushrooms, and I'm going to use mushroom broth for that. So I'm just waiting for this to melt. Okay, it's melted. I'm going to add around a 1/4 cup of onions, and I'm going to let that brown. For the gumbo, I'm going to add a whole cup of onions. I like a lot of onions. And I'm going to add a whole cup of celery and a whole cup of green peppers. Then I'm going to go back and add a little more onion, because even though they're supposed to be equally proportioned, I like onions. I'm partial to onions. And we're going to add around 2 tablespoons, this is around 2 tablespoons of garlic. And a dash of salt. Actually, I'm going to add some salt to the stock and hot water too, and of course to the gravy. Actually, I'll add it to the gravy later. I'm going to give it a good stir. I'm going to add the mushrooms to this now. Okay, I think that's the timer for the biscuits. Let me check on the biscuits. Not only do we have the biscuits, but the cobbler's done too. It's a little bit well done, but I personally don't mind that. You need to keep an eye on it. I'm going to put these aside because these are done and ready to be eaten. Now, this is boiling nicely. I'm just going to change places for a little bit. And I'm going to add half a cup of grits. Sometimes it's good to buy stone ground, and you need to check the ingredient. This one is Bob's Red Mills, and you just stir it. It's pretty easy. You have to make sure it doesn't get lumpy, and that's one of the reasons I like extra broth, because the water gets absorbed and it doesn't get lumpy easily. I'm going to turn the heat down in this one. There. In fact, I'm going to take it off the heat. I'm going to add a little bit of salt to it. Not much, because we're going to be adding cheese and that's salty. And a dash of pepper. And some cream. Around a 1/4 cup. Okay, it goes back on. It's going to start thickening soon. As soon as it starts thickening, we're going to add the cheese to it. There, you can see the texture has changed, but you're going to let it go for 1 more minute before adding the cheese. That looks good. That looks good, but I'm going to let that go. I want this to be very, very well cooked before I add the other ingredients. I'm going to add around a cup of cheese to this. This is so tasty. It's a very creamy, rich dish, and you're not supposed to eat it as your main dish. It's a side dish, so you can afford to let it be a little heavy. There, this is prepared and ready to be dished up. Again, it's important to do a taste test for the salt. This is divine. I have another recipe. So if you want to make more of a cake like grits, you take it at this stage, you crack a couple of eggs to it, put it in a bakeable casserole and put it in the oven for half an hour with a little cheese on top. It's very tasty. So this goes off. I'm just going to keep it here, cover it and leave it. My gumbo comes back here. This goes. All right. I'm putting the gumbo on high. So I'm going to add around 1 tablespoon, just this much, of tomato paste. I don't want more than that. And let's add the spices. So I'm going to put some bay leaf, and because I like my food with a little kick in it, bay leaf just adds a really nice flavor, and you take it out later. And I'm going to add some chili powder. This is around half a teaspoon. I'm going to put a little more. You can put less if you'd like it less, but I like it. I'm going to put some pepper. Okay, this is done. You can see it's very well done. I'm going to take this off the fire, and I'm going to prepare the roux for this. So for a gravy, we're going to put in some roux. For the gravy, we're going to put in some roux. So I have a little trick which makes sure that you never get it lumpy, even if you have things inside, which typically, you know, make your flour doesn't go in well. So take around 1/4 cup of flour, and we're going to add mushroom broth to this one. I'm going to use a stirrer. And we just mix it cold. And we're going to get some cream in this. You can put milk or you can put cream. I'm just going to put cream right now because I just have it right here. You can see there are absolutely no lumps whatsoever. And this is the best way of doing a roux. We put it in here. And leave these bits behind. We can add more broth, but you don't want to put it in this stage. And we just put it here and stir it. This is going to thicken up and make the perfect gravy. I think I was about to put some, I'm going to work in that little extra flour. I was putting in some pepper. Now, because normally a gumbo is thickened with meat As I mentioned, I am going to put in the pinto beans. This is just a can of organic pinto beans which I washed out, soaked for some time. There have been studies, a lot of people don't like using cans, but if you use beans for sodium and all that, and you soak it for a good 20 minutes, a lot of the not good stuff that's in a can comes out. You need to work this, and then we're going to top it up with vegetable broth. See, as you can see, this is done. It's nice and thick and perfectly smooth. So we're going to take this off and put that burner off. We're going to put all of it. Now, you also make a roux in this. So, the way So, we also make a roux in this. Typically, I need a little more. I should have added the roux to the stock before adding it, but because this is not enough liquid, and gumbo really needs to cook for a while and thicken. So, what I am going to do is I will take the old pot, add a little bit of flour to it, not too much, because okra actually soaks up a lot. I am going to take some water, hot water, and just stir it in. You can see it immediately thickens. I am going to add that in. This smells really good. Give it a nice stir so that everything is working together. And as this hot, now this is around 2 cups of okra which I have washed, dried, cut. You can also use frozen okra, but in my experience it's very difficult to make it non-slimy. I need a little more salt, just a dash more salt. I tend to eat more salt, but when you cook food, you have to customize it to yourself. Now, we are going to let this sit for a good 20 minutes. This is something you could let cook for a very long time. I think 20 minutes is enough. You have to keep giving it a stir, especially on an electric oven, stove if you are doing it, because of the beans and the other heavy stuff, it tends to stick in the bottom and you don't want it to burn. I am going to pour the gravy out in the gravy boat. Gravy train, the music. I guess gravy is universally, it is meant to be rich, because that's like, you always talk about the gravy on top of stuff being the most desirable aspect of it. Okay. You can see the okra, it looks uncooked. Some people like it like that, I personally don't. So, I am going to let this go for another 5 minutes. And while this is going, we are going to make what I forgot to mention initially is the drink. Now, when you think about the South, you think about the Southern hospitality, you have these visions of these big plantations and people having tea. So, what I am going to make is iced tea. Originally, I was thinking of Jack and Coke because bourbon, of course, originated in Tennessee, but you know, you can always add a little bourbon to this if you felt like it. Now, iced tea is actually very easy. People think it's complicated, but it's really not. You pull out some tea bags. I'm going to put in, I like it strong, so I'm going to make it in this mason jar and I'll show you why in a minute. I'm going to put in 2. Actually, I'm going to put in 3 because I want it to brew super fast and I like it strong. And we're going to add some hot water to it. So, this is just black tea. You can try different flavors, there is no restriction. And we are going to add a little bit of mint. Yeah, I am just making a glass right now, you can obviously increase it and then you just swirl it around and you let it sit for maybe 2 minutes. This color is already quite nice. Meanwhile, I am going to chop some lemon to squeeze and also for garnish. This is kind of hot now and probably vacuum sealed because when you heat it, the air expands. I mean, this is the best way to vacuum seal anything is to add something hot to it. I'm going to fish out the tea bags and trash them. Now, because this is an iced tea lemonade, that essentially just means that you add a lot of sugar and lemon to it. The combination of lemon and mint and tea and sugar, it's really, really refreshing. I'm actually going to go ahead and add a whole 1/3 cup. I know it looks like a lot, but you'd be surprised. Actually, I can't do it. I'm going to add less and then put more if I need to. And that's another reason I like to do it in a jar like this. I just pick it up and I give it a little shake and then it leaks all over me. And try not to burn myself in the process. Again, because this is electric, you need to keep stirring it if you leave it on the hot stuff. This is almost a little bit like a concentrate because you're going to be adding so much ice to it that it's going to melt at some point. So, you don't want to start off with something which has less flavor. It has to have extra flavor in it. What do you think? Should I let it go? There's hardly any place. I'm going to add some lemon to it. I think the full slices, there's no place for it. And I'm going to add some mint leaves. And I'm just going to let it sit while I dish up the rest of the food. So, let's dish it up. Some gumbo in our soup bowl. If you get a piece of bay leaf, don't eat it. It's too strongly flavored. But the flavor it adds to your gumbo is amazing. Look at it, it's so nice and thick. This is getting nice and chilled. Let's take out some grits. You can see it's become nice. I'm going to take a biscuit. It's cool enough now that I can use my hands. Let's do the real test where you pop it open and it's light and flaky. We're going to pour some gravy on it. We're going to dish up our peach cobbler. Again, this is a bit well done, but I like it well done, and you're going to see in a sec. This is it stewed in its own juice and gave us this really rich cobbler. Look at the color of the peach. It is so yummy. And what I'm going to do is, you can do whipped cream, ice cream, but I sometimes just like a dash of cream on the side. So I'm just going to pour the cream on the side. Like, it's not a very fancy design. And this is cold enough, so I'm going to pour this out. I'm going to garnish it. And here we have it, a complete meal, a southern meal. Bon appetit. Enjoy yourself.